So fingers crossed here.
Yeah.
We got this, guys.
Hi, everyone.
You'll do fine.
Yes, you'll do great, I'm sure. What's going to happen is I will introduce all of you. We're going to let everyone in. The questions will be in the chat, so people might enter those as they go. I'll encourage them to do if they come up with something, but we won't address questions until the end, and Professor Cole will moderate the questions at the end, and I will help keep time so we're able to get on to our next talk. And do you all have any questions for us before we let everyone in?
Well, since you're introducing us, should we still introduce ourselves like as part of our intro?
I'm just going to introduce your topic and the challenge. Yeah, because there may be people that are joining us for the first time into Catalyst, so into these presentations, and so we want to make sure that everyone knows to put everything in the chat. So.
Okay. Cool.
So we're good to introduce ourselves.
Yeah,
right,
so you should introduce yourselves.
You got quite a crowd going.
Yeah, you do.
Damn.
We're famous.
All right, and then just the general reminder to mute yourself when you're not talking.
Yes.
So that we're not popping up.
All right. See if everyone is. Give it a second for people to connect to audio here. Okay, hi, my name is Barbara Sisson. I'm a professor in the biology department, and welcome to our second session of Catalyst 300 presentations. Catalyst 300 is designed to have a challenge that people are addressing and then figure out a solution for it. And so we have a group that is focused on Jamaican Me Happy, clean water for all, one community at a time. And they're going to present, and then after they present, and we'll have a time for questions. Our questions will be in the chat. So if you have a question during the middle of the presentation, feel free to put it into the chat. It will be addressed at the end of the presentation. And Professor Cole, who is my co-host for today, he's from the Exercise Science Department. He will be moderating the questions at the end. And I ask that everyone make sure that you keep your mute button off, or on rather, so that way we don't interrupt our speakers inadvertently. And with that, I will let our speakers present their work.
Welcome to our presentation, Jamaican Me Happy, Clean Water for All, One Community at a Time. I'm Sonia.
I'm Samara.
I'm Sierra.
I'm Heath.
And I'm Garrett.
Water is something that many people across the world take advantage of. And with COVID-19, we may complain that most of our water fountains are turned off and we have to go to another floor to fill up our water bottles. But in other countries, some have to travel miles every day, and that water is anything but safe and sanitary, like what we have here. Clean, fresh water that is easy to access should be something that every human being has access to because of our body's dependence on it. Our bodies are made up of about 60% water, and our most important organs, such as our brain and heart, being composed of 73% and our lungs 83%. We can imagine the negative toll the regular consumption of contaminated water can have on our most important body parts. This water crisis brings us to the Caribbean island of Jamaica, where a majority of the residents struggle to find access to fresh drinking water. We decided to start our project within the St. Andrews Parish. St. Andrews Parish has a population of about 573,000 people. This is the highest population of all parishes in Jamaica, and it also includes Jamaica's capital, Kingston. This is one of the main reasons why we decided for this to be our main focus. Our starting towns are Stony Hill, Newcastle, and Bolt Bay, which you can see starred out in the map. This allows us to address the inability for rural as well as urban areas to access clean drinking water, in addition to helping a larger population from the start of our project. Now you may be wondering why Kingston is our focus and why we chose this country over many others that are also struggling from poor water access. The answer starts with inequality. Many people know Jamaica to be a big tourist destination and the hotspot for summer vacations. But those huge resorts with insane pools almost never run out of water. Outside the gates of the resorts are citizens of Jamaica struggling every day to receive the same quality of water access as their outside visitors. Water access in Jamaica is and has always been linked to power and poverty. The majority of the tourist communities often never run out of clean water due to these communities residing in the wealthier cities of the country. Those who live in Jamaica are often the least important in terms of receiving fresh, clean water. While some are sipping on margaritas, no more than 10 miles away, children are drinking and playing in chemically polluted water. It isn't just some small communities in Jamaica affected by this. Nearly 30% of the poorest households only have access to untreated water. Additionally, 5.7% of households obtain their water from rivers, and 3.1% obtain their water from ponds. Drinking as well as bathing in this unsanitary water can lead to many deadly diseases, which leads to an average of 14,000 deaths per day caused by unsanitary water. These diseases consist of, but are not limited to, cholera, typhoid, tuberculosis, dengue, malaria, and chikungunya. This can also include diarrhea and other fungal topical skin issues.
So this leads us to our previous solutions, piping and plumbing, as well as rainwater collection. As for piping and plumbing, only 71% of Jamaica's population has access to piped water. This percent not only includes piping in general, but it also includes homes that have piped water that is untreated. There is also a large amount of pipes that have leakage since they are unable to be repaired. Residents that live in St. Andrews Parish also experience disruptions in their water supply. These disruptions happen daily for about 7 to 10 hours without any warning. In some cases, water lockoffs can happen for days at a time. These water lockoffs happen whenever the National Water Commission decides to do it. They don't keep in mind who they're affecting and where they're affecting. The goal of this is to conserve water, but oftentimes it affects the poorest communities the most. By having these long stretches of time without water, the people caring for babies with dirty diapers, menstruating women, and everyone else that experiences biological functions that require the use of water all suffer and are all affected, as well as those who are sick and elderly. As previously stated, these lockoffs affect those in the poorest communities the most. This results in them having to rely on only rainwater during these times, which can be dirtier than most individuals assume. This leads us to rainwater collection.
With rainwater collection, some benefits include not having to travel rivers or ponds to get water, as these sources are often contaminated with soot, waste, and other harmful pollutants, as well as being able to store this water and use it for whatever needs necessary to the specific household. These rainwater collection devices consist of drums, bottles, and buckets, which families leave outside to collect water from when it rains, as well as off the roof of their own homes, then using this water whenever they need it. The problems with this solution include the fact that there are not enough collection centers to supply communities at a consistent rate, as well as droughts during the summer, severely limiting the amount of water that can be collected year-round. Now, according to the CDC, when rainwater is collected off of roofs or in rain barrels, it can carry bacteria, parasites, viruses, and other chemicals that can make you sick, and has been linked to disease outbreaks. There is also a large amount of dust, soot, and smoke accumulation on the roof due to the amount of trash that the impoverished people of Jamaica burn. Along with being contaminated with bacteria, this collected water also serves as a host to many types of insects. For example, the drums encourage the breeding of mosquito vectors, which may lead to diseases such as dengue, malaria, and chikungunya, as we mentioned earlier. Families often have to worry about contamination from the rainwater, but also about the insects that can contaminate their water as well.
Our solutions. Our initial solution is the addition of 3 groundwater wells in our designated towns of Bull Bay, Stony Hill, and Newcastle, as well as incorporating more emergency rainwater collection units with filtration devices, and finally spreading water purification education. The main part of our solution is the wells that we'll be adding to the communities to take advantage of the water available in the aquifers in these areas. This is clean water that will go a long way towards providing more clean water to everyone in the community. Bull Bay, Stony Hill, and Newcastle are the initial communities we chose, due to them being generally spread out across St. Andrews Parish. Ultimately, we wanted a larger, more spread out population to start out seeing how our solution works over a larger up their wells for water testing. The first step is requesting tests based on what kind of water source. In our case, it would be aquifers. Next is running tests on what type of contaminants are present in the water. The third and final step would be to collect the report from these tests and pay for it, which costs anywhere from $500 to $750. The cost of the wells can be anywhere from $1,000 to $12,000. The carbon-based filters within these wells would also cost between $500 and $1,000. So assuming the highest price to incorporate any additional or hidden charges, the total will be $39,000 for the first 3.
And moving on to water collection devices, these would largely consist of dry wells being implemented around the neighborhoods in our designated communities. These being larger wells acting like the previously used water collection devices by the Jamaicans, in that they take runoff water from roofs and storing them in larger, more secure storage areas. Having the water held underground is a much safer option in comparison to out in the open storage, as was commonplace beforehand. Now, speaking of safety, our dry wells will also be equipped with filtration systems so that the water they store and provide will be immediately safe upon withdrawal. Now, the filters for these systems would be sand gravel filters. Now, these act very similar to that of the filtration that water undergoes while seeping into the aquifers. This ensures a similar level of safety for the collected water, as well as the well water has more layers similar to this filter. Rainwater would also have less contamination going directly into our dry wells, and from there being able to be directly used by our community members. This can run up to a maximum cost of $5,000 per dry well. So with having 2 wells per town, the 6 total wells will cost $30,000. It has also been taken into consideration that not everyone will be interested or willing to take part in our solution. Some of the residents might not want to walk to the well for clean water if they think their own water collection systems of either rain barrels, rivers, or ponds are good enough. This has resulted in the addition of our education piece. The idea here would be to place about 6 signs and around each community for a total of 18 signs in the 3 cities, only costing about $3,000 in total. These would be made out of sustainable and recyclable bamboo in order to not harm the environment. Now, the signs would explain 5 different options for the water decontamination, these being boiling water / pasteurization, solar silt, hot rocks, solar and tree branch filtration, in an attempt to have the community members who decide to rely on their own collected water have safer methods of decontamination than they already employ.
As you can see, this is the model we have created for the signs we intend to have around the communities. These methods should not cost the residents of these locations any money because it uses items that residents should already have and that are easily available. We provided many options for the residents to choose from to increase the likelihood of them using one of the methods. We incorporated the use of simple diagrams to help some of the illiterate members in these communities. We also used the most simplified language we could to increase the signs outreach. In addition to the education of the signs, we are encouraging community leaders to host workshops to aid in the education of their communities. In these workshops, the leaders will be able to demonstrate the different methods to the residents.
Now, in regards to the projected timeline for the innovation would start prior to the drilling of these wells, but rather with the procurement of legal documentation. These documents in particular being the permit for well drilling, as well as the license to abstract and use water. These documents are required by the Water Resources Authority, better known as the WRA, and would be required for each of the wells of which we plan to drill for the innovation. Now, these, being that it has to go through a legal process, will take about 60 days. During this time, up to 60 days. During this time, investigations would be conducted to essentially test the sustainability of the areas to be able to withhold a well in terms of just essentially how clean the water is, as well as if there's enough to be able to hold a well. Once these have been approved, the drilling of the groundwater and dry wells can begin. Now, the groundwater wells would be done first, taking about 1 to 3 days for drilling and installation. However, this can change due to environmental factors, as well as just other delays that may come up. One of the most prominent environmental factors being that of rain and or hurricane-like conditions. Now, being in Jamaica, they have 2 prominent rainy seasons, one of which is that of a hurricane season. Should one of these storms occur during the construction process, that will pause construction and then continue once again after storms have passed, causing a bit of a delay, but again, can easily be overcome. Once this is completed, the dry well rainwater collection units would be installed following another 1 to 3 day basis. After these are both installed, it would take about 1 to 2 hours for the educational signs be put up near the natural water resources. Now, as accounting for delays, this would project about a 20-day project installation for construction for all 3 of the cities of which we plan to do for our initial plan. Now, as with most projects, there might be possible limitations that we could encounter. One of the most prominent being that of the contamination of the water from different cash crops. Now, Jamaica makes a lot of money off of their exports, such as that of coffee and other things. Now, due to farming, there could be the possible introduction of pesticides, fertilizers, and other pollutants into the water that could essentially make the water not safe to drink. However, we are combating this with our groundwater wells. They have the layering of rocks that go down to the water source from the aquifer that essentially filter out a lot of the pollutants before it is able to reach the water supply over re-entering the aquifer. Another possible source is that of human sources. Now, being that we can't necessarily get around this, we plan to combat it by, again, offering these other filtration methods to be able to help give people options to being able to clean their own water should the water they get from the well not be clean to their standing. Now, another very prominent one would be the case of the aquifer drying out. Now, by definition, this is determined by when the water level of the aquifer is less than the level of which the intake pump for the well is at. However, this is very easily overcome due to the fact that the aquifer well would be collecting water from the surface as well as that of rainwater. Now, in the case that even that's not enough and it still is considered drying out, then we have the rainwater collection units that can help as a backup until enough water is in place to be able to access. Now, we also plan to kind of combat this from the possible misuse of the water, in that there will be sanctions on these wells to make sure that these wells are only used for community purposes, as well as just make sure it's not used for agriculture.
Now, considering our funding, our budget will come from the Caribbean Regional Fund of Wastewater Management, or the CREW Fund, that funds countries in the Caribbean who ban the use of plastics. It was stated that Jamaica is starting to ban plastics at the beginning of January 2020, and they've gotten rid of most of their plastic straws and bags so far. An example of this would be that in grocery stores, they often have shopping bags that are canvas and require additional purchase instead of their typical plastic bags. This would allow Jamaica to be part of this fund, allocating $3 million to the aid in processing people's Jamaican clean water. Now, one of the requirements for this fund is that half of it goes towards the restoration and management of wastewater treatment facilities. This would leave us $1.5 million for their wells, education, water testing, and maintenance as a whole.
To maximize the use of the budget, a multi-year plan has been created to add additional resources to other parishes, as well as over the course of a few years. While setting aside $100,000 for maintenance and water testing, this leaves the budget with around $1.3 million. At approximately $24,000 per town, this can be divided into about 55 additional towns across the 13 parishes. The number of wells dispersed by parish will be dictated by the total population by taking the total population divided by the total number of wells that can be distributed. So parishes such as St. Andrews will have the most wells because of the larger population.
Now you may be wondering just how this is going to impact these communities in the long run. There are 4 ways that we have come up with that our solution will be able to benefit these communities in the following years. The first benefit is that communities will have quicker access to water. Our main goal was to allow for safer and easier access to water, and having filtered wells placed in the center of towns allows for this. This can help community members from having to make unsafe trips to and from different water sources multiple times a day. With rivers, there is often moss on the rocks and water on the rocks that make them slippery and dangerous to walk on. In addition to the wells being closer to the town and homes, families will have more time to spend together and less time spent traveling. Additionally, our use of rainwater collection systems that all contain their own individual filters allows for an emergency backup of water for the families in the communities. The second benefit is the decreases in waterborne diseases and sicknesses. Many people in these communities have been drinking the contaminated water for the majority of their life. We discussed earlier the long list of diseases that can come from unsanitary water. Many locals source their water from ponds, which are stagnant sources that are perfect for mosquitoes to breed. This can be very dangerous for one's health. By having a communal filtered source of fresh water, we can keep community members from putting themselves in harm's way. Our third benefit is healthier and more educated communities. Many rural Jamaicans struggle to receive education, and women struggle more so than the males. Females often are in charge of collecting water and preparing it in food and baths for their families. So the use of the signs is intended to help that. Hopefully by having these educational signs around the communities, we can help families who continue to use other sources of water outside the well still achieve clean water. With images depicting boiling water or even leaving your water out in the sun, we hope these messages can reach the large community populations and help them become more aware of what they can do to keep their family safe. Our final benefit is stronger communities. With all of these benefits together, we can only imagine how much a community can change. What makes a strong community is one of family, health, and education. While Jamaicans have the family part down pat, we can only hope to help their families grow stronger, healthier, and smarter. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, if you joined us a little bit later, we're going to do our question and answer period through the chat. So if you have questions, please type them into the chat, and we'll have some moderation of that by Professor Cole.
So the first question is regarding the educational sign model you spoke about. What percentage of Jamaica's population is illiterate, and does the illiteracy rate vary from parish to parish?
While I don't have the specific statistic on what percentage of Jamaica's communities are illiterate, in the communities that we are planning on having these signs up, the majority of them are, because the schools are very rare and scarce and they have very little resources to fund them. And even when there are certain members in communities that receive education, it's usually on the primary level and don't make it to middle school or high school. And sometimes those levels still lack the ability to read fully. And the first parish, St. Andrew's Parish, has a low class because a lot of them are rural towns that don't have access to the educational buildings and resources that they would have in some of the wealthier parishes and communities.
Based on your aquifer map, there were some areas in blue and some in brown. Does this mean different types of water in the aquifer, and how might that affect your well placements?
Yeah, so the aquifers that are closer to the ocean are more likely to have saline or brackish waters due to the minimal distance between the aquifer and the salty seawater. And we do have carbon filters in place inside of our wells to help kind of reduce the amount of salt that was in that. But that's also why we have our multiple different levels of solution. In those villages that have more salty saline water, we are putting more of a focus on the dry wells, but we took that into consideration, the various setbacks.
Are there other questions from the audience? I have one. With your method of education and the signs, how many of those particular methods of water purification might be new to those communities, something that they might have to learn a little bit more about, as opposed to just something that they need to be reminded about that, that they maybe have been exposed to before?
Could you repeat the question?
Yes. how many of the methods of water purification that you have on your sign might be something that's new to that community, something that they may have to have some instruction about, as opposed to things that they just might need to be reminded that here's a way that you can do it, and here's another way that you can do it that you might have done in the past.
Well, if you want to go to that slide that has our sign on it, we can explain some of them real quick, just to point them out to you. As you can see, probably the ones that would need more explaining is the solar silt, as that requires a few more steps in addition to boiling water, which is something that many of the members in the community already do. It's more of kind of just a reminder to take this extra step. Something also that might be more new is a tree branch filtration, as that isn't something that is quite popular there, but it is something that could be used and demonstrated and taught how to use. But the solar, hot rocks, and the boiling are all things that have been used by the community members, but they just might need a refresher on.
Thanks.
One last question. Most Catalyst projects are not continued after these presentations. Do you think your project could have a real world application? Also, would members of your group be willing to go to Jamaica to help build the wells and install the pipes?
Yes, so our presentation, we talked with Denise, who is in charge of the Blue Mountain Project in Jamaica, and she actually asked us for our presentation and project after completion, because she hopes to be able to implement some of the stuff that we have found into the community of Hagley Gap, which is one of the rural towns. In addition, I feel like we would be willing to definitely go to Jamaica. I know Jamaica is a place that Ripon College often travels to. As personally, I went to Jamaica my freshman year with Joe Hatcher to Hagley Gap to help out in the community. So it's definitely something that's possible to do, to have student volunteers go and help with the construction.
Thanks. I think due to the interest of time, I think we'll end our questions there because we have more presentations to get to. But I would like to thank our group, and it's great to know that you might, have an interest in continuing this on in Jamaica. And I encourage all of you who are the audience members to join us in other presentations throughout the day and to learn more about these challenges. So thank you and great job, guys.